Imagine if I told you there was an ancient, hidden guide to life, a treasure of wisdom sitting right in plain sight, yet so many people either overlook it or fail to grasp its true value. Picture a book that contains answers to the deepest questions we all face. How should I live? Who can I trust? Where can I find peace and lasting purpose? This isn't your typical self-help manual or just another motivational speech. This is the Book of Proverbs, a timeless collection of profound truths written with divine insight to help unlock a life full of meaning, strength, and clarity. But here's the thing. Proverbs isn't just about telling us what to do. It invites us into something deeper. Proverbs peels back the surface of daily life and holds up a mirror to our choices, showing us the paths that lead to joy and the ones that lead to destruction. Most people dismiss Proverbs as a quaint list of sayings, maybe useful advice, but a little outdated for today. But what if I told you that these teachings go far beyond practical tips? They're spiritual tools designed to transform the very foundation of your life. These aren't words meant to inspire you for just a moment. They're here to reshape your heart, align your soul with God's eternal truths, and equip you to navigate life's toughest storms with both courage and grace. If I were in your shoes, I'd think twice before chasing the next motivational video or podcast. Instead, imagine starting each morning with this wisdom, a guide that not only uplifts you but draws you closer to God, the true source of understanding. Together, we're going to explore Proverbs topic by topic, allowing its truths to settle deep into your soul. By the time we reach the end of this journey, I believe you'll begin to see the world in a completely different light, through the lens of God's wisdom. So grab a pen, take a deep breath, and get ready for a journey that will inspire, challenge, and, if you're open to it, completely change your life. And if these lessons speak to you, share them with others. The wisdom of Proverbs isn't meant to stay with you. It's a light for a dark world, a gift to be passed on. Let's uncover the power of Proverbs together. Here at Deep Bible Stories, we believe wisdom isn't just ancient, it's alive and waiting for us today. So what is the Book of Proverbs really? Many think of it as a collection of sayings, practical life tips, moral lessons, or life hacks for better living. But Proverbs is so much more. It's not merely a guide to polite living or a relic of ancient morality. It's a divinely inspired roadmap for a life rooted in truth, humility, and honor. This isn't a book meant to gather dust on a shelf. Proverbs is alive, calling us to understand life with depth, clarity, and connection to God's heart. It's wisdom that transcends centuries and cultures, speaking directly to the struggles and desires we still wrestle with today. Tradition tells us that much of Proverbs was written by King Solomon, a man famous for the wisdom God personally granted him. When Solomon could have asked for power, fame, or riches, he chose wisdom. To lead his people with understanding, his request pleased God, and Solomon was given unmatched insight. The Book of Proverbs is a glimpse into this divine wisdom, a treasure trove of lessons distilled into short, impactful phrases. Yet Proverbs isn't just about Solomon. It reflects God's Spirit moving through the words to guide us all. Each proverb is like a seed, small, yet packed with the potential to transform your entire life if you let it take root. Think of Proverbs as timeless. It was relevant thousands of years ago and remains astonishingly relevant today. It tackles universal issues: how to live with integrity, choose trustworthy companions, handle money wisely, navigate relationships, and deal with anger, pride, and temptation. And yet, it doesn't stop at practical advice. It goes further, showing us how to align our lives with God's eternal perspective. At its core, Proverbs is an invitation, not just to live better, but to pursue true wisdom, which begins with one thing: the fear of the Lord. Proverbs 1 verse 7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." What does that mean? It's not a fear that drives us away from God. It's an awe that draws us closer. It's the realization of God's holiness, power, and justice. To fear the Lord is to understand that God is infinitely greater than we can comprehend, yet He graciously invites us to draw near to Him. Solomon's life serves as a vivid illustration of both the rewards of living in awe of God and the dangers of turning away. In his early reign, Solomon walked in humility, seeking wisdom and placing God at the center of his decisions. But as the years passed, his heart grew divided. Wealth, political alliances, and indulgences distracted him, pulling him further from the foundation he had built. The same man who wrote, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," eventually strayed from that very principle. Proverbs opens with this truth to call us back to what really matters. It's not just a suggestion, it's a plea. Without the fear of the Lord, even the most brilliant minds or well-intentioned lives can veer off course. True wisdom starts with recognizing that God's ways are higher than ours. It begins with humility, an acknowledgement that we are not the source of knowledge or truth. He is. Consider Solomon's request in 1 Kings 3 verse 9, where he prays, "Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong." Solomon's wisdom didn't come from his own strength or intellect. It was a gift from God, born out of humility and dependence. And yet, with all his wisdom, Solomon repeatedly points us back to this one truth. The fear of the Lord is the foundation. Without it, we become blind to our own flaws and susceptible to the traps of pride and self-reliance. But what does this fear of the Lord really mean? It's not the kind of fear that causes us to cower or hide. It's a deep, reverent awe. It's the realization that God is holy, just, and all-knowing, yet merciful and loving. Proverbs reminds us that this posture of reverence is what keeps us teachable, open to correction, and anchored in truth. Throughout Proverbs, Solomon shows us that wisdom is not just about knowledge or intelligence, it's about a heart aligned with God's character. Proverbs 9:10 reinforces this, saying, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." To fear the Lord is to place him at the center of every decision, every relationship, every plan. It's the humility to admit that we don't have all the answers, and the trust to let God lead the way. The book of Ecclesiastes, also written by Solomon, gives us a glimpse into the emptiness of a life that pursues everything but God. In Ecclesiastes 12 verse 13, Solomon concludes, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." This is the wisdom he shares after reflecting on his own life, a life filled with power, wealth, and indulgence, yet hollow without God at its core. But why is this fear of the Lord so essential? Proverbs teaches us that it sets everything in its proper place. It's a reminder that God is the center of the universe, not us. It's a humbling truth that human knowledge, no matter how advanced, is limited, while God's wisdom is infinite. This reverence for God keeps us grounded, making us open to learning, correction, and growth. The ancient wisdom of the Book of Sirach, a text cherished in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, echoes this principle. Sirach 1 verse 14 says, "To fear the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. She is created with the faithful in the womb." Wisdom isn't something we gain purely through effort. It's a gift, planted in the hearts of those who seek God earnestly and humbly. Imagine standing in awe before the throne of God, overwhelmed by His glory, His purity, and His infinite power. This is the kind of reverence Proverbs calls us to, an awe that humbles us, reminds us of our own limitations, and stirs within us a desire to walk in God's ways. Solomon's early years reflect this awe, and his later years warn us of what happens when we lose it. His story serves as both a lesson and a warning. As a young king, Solomon walked in the fear of the Lord, seeking wisdom and making decisions that honored God. But over time, pride crept in. His heart was drawn away by distractions, wealth, foreign alliances, and even idolatry. The same man who began his reign with such humility ended up wandering from the very foundation of his wisdom. Proverbs opens with the fear of the Lord because it is the anchor that keeps us steady. Without it, even the wisest among us can falter. In today's culture, we're often taught that wisdom comes from within, that self-discovery and self-reliance are the keys to success. But Proverbs turns this idea upside down. It challenges us to start with humility, to acknowledge that true wisdom begins when we surrender our own understanding and submit to God's authority. Proverbs also emphasizes the importance of relationships. The people we allow into our lives have a profound impact on our character, values, and spiritual journey. Proverbs 13 verse 20 says, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm." The company we keep can either draw us closer to God or lead us away from Him. Picture Solomon as a young king, surrounded by advisors, foreign dignitaries, and counselors. Early in his reign, he sought out wise and God-fearing voices, people who strengthened his commitment to follow God's ways. But as time went on, his inner circle changed. Political alliances, foreign marriages, and worldly influences began to erode the foundation of his faith. These relationships didn't just distract him, they led him to compromise his values and ultimately his relationship with God. Solomon's life teaches us that the influence of others is powerful. Proverbs warns us not to take this lightly. Relationships are sacred. They shape who we are and where we're headed. Proverbs 22 verse 24 to 25 cautions, "Do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared." This isn't just about avoiding conflict. It's a reminder that the attitudes, behaviors, and values of those around us can seep into our own hearts if we're not careful. The book of Sirach offers a similar perspective, emphasizing the value of faithful and wise friends. Sirach 6 verse 14 says, "Faithful friends are a sturdy shelter. Whoever finds one has found a treasure." True friendships are more than social connections. They're spiritual partnerships. They're meant to build us up, challenge us, and help us grow in our walk with God. Proverbs calls us to approach relationships with intention and discernment. Are the people in your life encouraging you to walk in wisdom, truth, and faith? Or are they pulling you away from God's purpose for your life? Proverbs urges us to choose relationships that sharpen us, as iron sharpens iron. Proverbs 27 verse 17. True friends aren't just there for convenience or flattery. They're there to refine us, sometimes through hard truths and honest conversations. Imagine Solomon as a young leader, listening to trusted voices who pushed him to honor God. Now picture him later in life, surrounded by influences that lured him toward compromise. His story reminds us that the people we walk with have the power to shape the direction of our lives. The contrast in Solomon's life is a sobering reminder. Wisdom in relationships is not a one-time decision. It's an ongoing commitment. Proverbs, written from the depths of Solomon's own experiences, makes this clear. Who we surround ourselves with matters deeply. Are our companions leading us toward life or toward destruction? The people closest to us influence the choices we make, the habits we form, and even the direction of our faith. Proverbs 27 verse 6 reminds us, "Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses." A real friend, one worth keeping, isn't someone who simply tells you what you want to hear. They're the ones who tell you what you need to hear, even when it's uncomfortable. True friendships have substance. They're built on love, trust, and accountability, and they refine us in the process. But wisdom in relationships isn't just about avoiding bad influences. It's about seeking out those who inspire and challenge us to grow. Proverbs 17 verse 17 declares, "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity." The right relationships will strengthen you in your weakest moments. They'll be a source of encouragement and guidance, pointing you back to God's truth when life gets overwhelming. Unfortunately, Solomon's life reveals what happens when we lose sight of this. As king, he formed alliances and relationships that seemed politically advantageous, but were spiritually disastrous. His foreign wives brought idolatry into his kingdom, and the compromises he made in these relationships ultimately led to the unraveling of his legacy. Proverbs 22, verse 24 to 25, takes this lesson even further. "Do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared." Proverbs isn't just warning us about toxic relationships. It's showing us how easily we can adopt the habits and mindsets of the people around us. Without realizing it, their anger, pride, or recklessness can influence us, shaping our character in ways that draw us further from God. The book of Sirach echoes this sentiment with urgency. Sirach 6 verse 14 to 17 says, "A faithful friend is a sturdy shelter. Whoever finds one finds a treasure." A faithful friend is beyond price. No amount can balance their worth. True friends, Proverbs and Sirach teach, are a gift from God. They're rare and precious, a source of protection and strength in a world full of chaos and temptation. But modern culture often treats relationships as disposable. Friendships come and go, and social media has reduced meaningful connections to surface-level interactions. Proverbs challenges us to dig deeper. It urges us to choose our relationships with care, to surround ourselves with people who sharpen us spiritually and inspire us to live in alignment with God's wisdom. Think for a moment about your closest relationships. Do you feel encouraged, uplifted, and challenged to be the person God has called you to be? Or are there relationships that pull you away from His truth, leaving you more restless, critical, or distracted? Proverbs calls us to evaluate these connections with honesty and courage. One of the most well-known verses in Proverbs is 27 verse 17. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. This verse is a powerful image of what real friendship looks like. Iron sharpening iron requires friction. It's not always comfortable, but it's necessary for growth. A godly friend is someone who isn't afraid to hold you accountable, to speak the truth in love, and to push you toward your God-given potential. This kind of sharpening isn't about perfection. It's about refinement. Real friends don't just support you when it's easy. They stand with you in the hard moments, challenging you to rise above your struggles and stay faithful to God's path. Picture Solomon as a young king, receiving advice from trusted counselors who encouraged him to follow God wholeheartedly. In those early years, his relationships likely strengthened his faith and kept him grounded in wisdom. But later in life, as he surrounded himself with people who didn't share his commitment to God, he drifted further and further from his foundation. His story is a reminder that relationships can either build us up or tear us down. Who are you walking with? Are the people in your life helping you become more like Christ, or are they leading you into compromise? Proverbs challenges us to take these questions seriously. Building relationships with the wise takes effort, but it's worth it. It's about being intentional, discerning, and sometimes having the courage to let go of relationships that no longer align with God's purpose for your life. True friendship isn't casual, it's a spiritual partnership. Proverbs reminds us that when we surround ourselves with wise, godly people, we're better equipped to face life's storms, grow in wisdom, and live out the purpose God has placed on our lives. Another theme that Proverbs emphasizes is the incredible power of words. Words, according to Proverbs, are never meaningless. They're not just sounds or sentences strung together. They're powerful. Proverbs 18 verse 21 tells us, "The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit." In other words, what you say has a lasting impact, for good or for harm. Solomon, as a king, understood this deeply. His words could shape the destiny of a nation. A single decree could bring peace or ignite conflict. And while most of us don't rule kingdoms, the same principle applies to our everyday lives. The words we speak have the power to heal or wound, to encourage or tear down, to bring life or destruction. Think about a time in your own life when someone's words profoundly impacted you. Maybe it was a kind comment that lifted you up, or a harsh remark that cut deeply. Proverbs 12 verse 18 paints this picture vividly. "The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." Words spoken carelessly can leave scars. But words spoken with wisdom can mend what's broken. Solomon likely witnessed both sides of this truth during his reign. In his early years, his wisdom was celebrated, and his words brought justice and healing. But as his heart grew divided, even his words lost their weight, becoming compromised by distraction and pride. Proverbs calls us to approach our words with intentionality. Every conversation, every response, and even the tone we use has the potential to create ripples, shaping not only our lives, but the lives of those around us. Proverbs 15 verse 1 reminds us, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." This isn't just practical advice, it's a spiritual principle. Gentleness, humility, and patience in our speech can diffuse conflict and build bridges, while reckless words can escalate tension and tear down relationships. Proverbs challenges us to pause, to think before we speak, and to ask ourselves, are my words reflecting God's character? But the power of words doesn't stop at how they affect others. They also shape our own hearts. In James 3 verse 4-5, the tongue is compared to the rudder of a ship, small but capable of steering the entire vessel. Our words have the power to direct the course of our lives. Are we speaking words of faith, truth, and love, or are we allowing negativity, pride, or anger to dictate our speech? But Proverbs doesn't shy away from the destructive potential of words either. Proverbs 12 verse 18 offers a stark contrast. The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Reckless words, whether spoken in anger, pride, or carelessness, have the power to cut deeply, like a weapon aimed at someone's heart. And the wounds they leave behind can last far longer than we realize. Think about a time when someone's harsh or careless words hurt you. The sting of those words might have faded, but the memory remains. Now consider the opposite. A moment when someone's encouragement or kindness made all the difference in your life. That's the power of a wise tongue. Solomon's writings remind us that we have a choice. Every word we speak can either build someone up or tear them down. Proverbs 15 verse 4 reinforces this, saying, "The soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit." Words that are kind and life-giving have the ability to nurture others, much like a tree that provides shade and sustenance. But on the flip side, harsh or deceitful words can crush the spirit, leaving emotional and spiritual wounds. This principle challenges us to consider not just what we say, but the way we say it. Self-control, especially in speech, isn't something that comes naturally. It takes intentional effort and reliance on God. James 1 verse 19 in the New Testament reflects the same wisdom found in Proverbs. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Listening, pausing, and responding thoughtfully, it's a discipline that reflects God's character and brings peace to our interactions. Proverbs also connects the power of words to the condition of our hearts. What comes out of our mouths is often a reflection of what's stored in our hearts. Proverbs 4 verse 23 reminds us, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." If our hearts are filled with bitterness, pride, or anger, our words will reveal it. But if we fill our hearts with God's truth, our words will naturally reflect wisdom, love, and grace. The book of Sirach echoes this teaching, emphasizing the connection between speech and inner character. Sirach 27 verse 4 says, "When a sieve is shaken, the refuse remains, so a person's filth remains in their speech." This imagery of sifting highlights how our words reveal the true state of our hearts. Sirach, like Proverbs, challenges us to examine not just what we say, but why we say it. In today's world, where words are often thrown around carelessly, whether in face-to-face conversations or online, Proverbs feels more relevant than ever. Social media especially has amplified the speed and reach of our words, making it easier than ever to wound, criticize, or tear others down. But Proverbs challenges us to resist this culture of impulsive speech. It invites us to use our words intentionally, to bring healing instead of harm. Proverbs 18 verse 21 puts it bluntly, "The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit." The fruit of our words, whether good or bad, will eventually come back to us. Words spoken in anger or haste often create ripple effects of hurt and division. But words spoken with love and wisdom plant seeds of hope, unity, and restoration. What kind of fruit are your words producing? Are they building others up or creating division? Proverbs invites us to pause and reflect before we speak, to let God's Spirit guide our tongues so that our words can be a source of light in a dark world. Beyond words, Proverbs also addresses another central theme of life, work and wealth. Proverbs views work not as a curse or a burden, but as an opportunity to honor God. Work, when done with diligence and integrity, reflects God's character and brings purpose to our lives. Proverbs 10 verse 4 teaches, "Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth." This isn't just about financial success, it's about living with intention, putting effort into the tasks God has given us, and being faithful in the small things. King Solomon, with all his wisdom and wealth, understood the value of hard work and the dangers of laziness. Proverbs 6 verse 6-8 uses the example of the ant. "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest." This simple creature embodies the principles of discipline, preparation, and perseverance. It doesn't need constant supervision or external motivation. It works diligently because it understands the importance of preparation. Imagine Solomon, the wealthiest man of his time, pointing to an ant as an example of wisdom. His message is clear. It's not the size of your task that matters, but the faithfulness with which you approach it. Proverbs challenges us to work with diligence and integrity, not just for personal gain, but as a way of honoring God. Proverbs also speaks to the dangers of greed and the pursuit of wealth at any cost. Proverbs 22 verse 7 warns, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender." This verse highlights the pitfalls of living beyond our means. In a world that constantly pushes us to spend more, buy more, and accumulate more, Proverbs calls us to contentment and financial wisdom. Debt, when unchecked, can quickly become a form of bondage. It places our trust in material things rather than in God's provision. Proverbs invites us to live within our means, to be content with what we have, and to approach our finances with humility and gratitude. The book of Sirach also echoes these principles, offering a warning about the dangers of chasing wealth. Sirach 31 verse 1 says, "Wakefulness over wealth wastes away one's flesh, and anxiety about it drives away sleep." Both Proverbs and Sirach remind us that wealth without wisdom can consume us, leaving us restless, empty, and disconnected from what truly matters. Proverbs 11 verse 24 to 25 offers a countercultural perspective. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. This paradox shows us that generosity isn't just about helping others, it's also about trusting God's provision. When we give freely, we reflect God's heart, and He blesses us in ways far greater than material wealth. Proverbs doesn't stop at hard work or financial wisdom. It goes deeper, highlighting integrity as the foundation of a meaningful life. Integrity isn't just about being honest when people are watching, it's about staying true to God's principles in every situation, big or small. Proverbs 10 verse 9 states, "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out." This verse paints a powerful image. A life of integrity is like walking on solid ground, safe and steady. But without integrity, life becomes uncertain, unstable, like walking on a cracked and crumbling path. King Solomon, despite his immense wisdom, knew firsthand how tempting it can be to compromise integrity. Early in his reign, Solomon's wisdom and righteousness were celebrated. He sought to lead his people with justice and humility. But as the years passed, the cracks in his character began to show. His compromises, whether in his relationships, his alliances, or his priorities, eventually led to the unraveling of his legacy. Proverbs 11 verse 3 warns, "The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity." It's a sobering reminder that integrity is a compass. It helps us navigate life with clarity and purpose. But when we stray, letting dishonesty or selfishness guide us, it leads us toward destruction. Integrity, as Proverbs describes it, isn't just about our actions. It's about who we are at our core. It's about living in alignment with God's character. Proverbs 4 verse 25-27 says, "Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths for your feet and be steadfast in all your ways. Do not turn to the right or the left. Keep your foot from evil." This is the call of integrity, to remain steadfast, focused, and unwavering in our commitment to walk in God's ways, no matter what distractions or temptations come our way. The book of Sirach also echoes this theme, reminding us that integrity often comes with sacrifice. Sirach 4 verse 28 says, "Strive even to death for the truth, and the Lord God will fight for you." Like Proverbs, Sirach calls us to remain faithful to God's truth, even when it costs us something, be it comfort, reputation, or worldly gain. Integrity isn't about convenience, it's about conviction. But living with integrity isn't easy in a world that often rewards shortcuts, deception, and self-promotion. Proverbs 28 verse 6 reminds us, "Better the poor whose walk is blameless than the rich whose ways are perverse." This verse flips the world's values on their head. True wealth isn't measured by material possessions or success. It's found in a life lived with honesty, faithfulness, and a clear conscience. Imagine the kind of legacy that comes from walking in integrity. Proverbs 20 verse 7 declares, The righteous lead blameless lives. Blessed are their children after them. A life of integrity doesn't just bless the individual, it creates a ripple effect, leaving a legacy of faith and character for future generations. When we choose to live with integrity, we're not only honoring God, we're also setting an example for those who come after us. Integrity is also a light in a dark world. Proverbs 4 verse 18 says, "The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day." When we walk in integrity, our lives become a testimony. People see the difference in the way we live, and that light can inspire others to seek God's truth. Proverbs also warns us about pride and its corrosive effects. In a world that often glorifies self-confidence and achievement, Proverbs flips the script, teaching that humility, not pride, is the foundation of true greatness. Proverbs 16 verse 18 famously says, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." Pride isn't just a minor flaw. It's a force that blinds us to our weaknesses, cuts us off from God, and ultimately leads to our downfall. Solomon's life is a vivid example of this. When he began his reign, Solomon was the picture of humility, asking God for wisdom instead of power or wealth. But as his fame, fortune, and influence grew, so did his pride. Over time, Solomon began to rely on his own understanding instead of God's guidance. His story shows us how pride can creep in almost unnoticed, growing in the shadow of success until it eventually consumes us. Proverbs 11 verse 2 adds, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." While the world may see pride as confidence or strength, Proverbs exposes it as a dangerous blind spot. Pride leads us to believe we don't need God, and that's the moment we become vulnerable to making poor decisions. Humility, on the other hand, opens the door to true wisdom. Proverbs 3 verse 34 says, "He mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed." Humility keeps us grounded, reminding us that everything we have, our talents, our resources, even our very breath, comes from God. It keeps us teachable, ready to receive correction and grow in wisdom. The book of Sirach reflects this same truth. Sirach 3 verse 18 advises, "The greater you are, the more you must humble yourself, so you will find favor in the sight of the Lord." The more we achieve, the more we're called to remember that all glory belongs to God. Humility isn't about thinking less of ourselves, it's about thinking of ourselves less and focusing on how we can honor God and serve others. Proverbs 29 verse 23 sums it up well. "Pride brings a person low, but the lowly in spirit gain honor." This verse reminds us that true honor doesn't come from self-promotion or accomplishments. It comes from walking humbly with God. Jesus himself demonstrated this in the New Testament, showing us the ultimate example of humility. Philippians 2 verse 6-8 describes how Jesus, though fully God, humbled himself by becoming human, serving others, and ultimately dying on the cross for our sins. This is the paradox of humility. The more we lower ourselves, the more God lifts us up. But Proverbs warns us that pride can disguise itself in subtle ways. Proverbs 26 verse 12 cautions, "Do you see a person wise in their own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for them." Pride often masquerades as self-confidence, independence, or even competence, but it blinds us to our need for God. Take a moment to reflect. Are there areas in your life where pride has taken root? Are you relying on your own understanding instead of trusting in God's wisdom? Proverbs invites us to lay down our pride, to surrender our self-reliance, and to walk humbly with the Lord. Trusting God is another major theme in Proverbs, and it challenges the very way we approach life. Proverbs 3 verse 5-6 is one of the most well-loved verses in the Bible, and for good reason. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." This is an invitation to surrender, not just some areas of our lives, but every part. But let's be honest, trusting God completely is easier said than done. We're often tempted to rely on our own understanding, to plan out our lives based on what makes sense to us. Yet Proverbs 28 verse 26 reminds us, "Those who trust in themselves are fools, but those who walk in wisdom are kept safe." This isn't meant to insult us. It's a loving warning. Our understanding is finite. We don't see the full picture, but God does. Trusting him means acknowledging that his perspective is far greater than ours. and that his ways, though sometimes mysterious, are always good. Imagine you're standing in a dense forest, unsure which path to take. You can rely on your own sense of direction, or you can trust the guide who knows every twist and turn of the trail. Proverbs teaches us that God is that guide. He not only knows the path ahead, he has already paved the way. Proverbs 16 verse 9 captures this truth beautifully. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. We're encouraged to make plans, to dream, and to work hard. But Proverbs reminds us that ultimately, it's God who directs our path. Trusting him doesn't mean we stop planning. It means we hold our plans with open hands, ready to let God lead us in a better direction if he wills it. Trusting God also requires humility. Proverbs 19 verse 21 reinforces this, saying, "Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails." Humility allows us to recognize that our plans, no matter how well thought out, might not align with God's greater purpose. And while it can be hard to let go, Proverbs assures us that God's plans are always for our ultimate good. The book of Job, another profound wisdom text, echoes this truth. Job endured immense suffering, yet through his trials, he came to understand the sovereignty of God. Job 12 verse 13 declares, "To God belong wisdom and power. Counsel and understanding are his." Like Proverbs, Job teaches us that trusting God doesn't mean we'll always understand his ways. It means believing that his wisdom is far greater than our own. This trust brings a peace that self-reliance can never provide. Proverbs 3 verse 24 offers a comforting promise. "When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet." Trusting God with our decisions and struggles allows us to rest, not just physically but spiritually. When we stop striving to control everything ourselves and hand it over to God, we find freedom from the anxiety and exhaustion that come from trying to carry life's burdens on our own. Are there areas in your life where you're struggling to trust God? Maybe it's a decision you're facing, a relationship that feels uncertain, or a season of waiting that tests your patience. Proverbs invites us to surrender these areas to God, to lean on his understanding instead of our own, and to trust that he is working all things together for good. Proverbs 3 verse 7 to 8 offers a further encouragement. "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones." Trusting God isn't just a spiritual act. It impacts every part of our lives. It brings healing, restoration, and peace that flows into our minds, bodies, and spirits. Another area where Proverbs challenges us is in controlling our emotions, particularly anger. Anger is a powerful and natural human emotion, but Proverbs warns us that unchecked anger can be destructive. Proverbs 16 verse 32 says, "Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city." Think about that for a moment. In ancient times, warriors were celebrated for their strength and bravery, yet Proverbs places greater value on patience and self-control. Why? Because conquering your own heart is far more difficult and far more honorable than conquering anything in the external world. Anger, while natural, is dangerous when left uncontrolled. Proverbs 29 verse 11 warns, "Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end." The distinction is clear. A fool is ruled by their emotions, reacting impulsively without considering the consequences. But a wise person exercises restraint, choosing to respond thoughtfully and with grace. Imagine Solomon as a king, dealing with conflicts, betrayals, and constant challenges. He understood the cost of letting anger control his decisions. For a king, one moment of rage could lead to disastrous outcomes. For us, unchecked anger might not destroy kingdoms, but it can destroy relationships, reputations, and even our own peace of mind. Proverbs 19 verse 11 gives us a powerful reminder. "A person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense." In moments of frustration or hurt, we're often tempted to lash out or hold a grudge. But Proverbs challenges us to rise above, to extend grace instead of giving in to our impulses. This kind of patience isn't weakness, it's strength. It reflects the character of God, who is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. Even righteous anger at injustice or wrongdoing, must be handled carefully. Proverbs 14 verse 29 says, "Whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly." Righteous anger can motivate us to act, but even then we're called to channel it wisely. Impulsive or thoughtless actions, even when fueled by justifiable anger, often lead to regret. The book of Sirach offers similar wisdom. Sirach 28 verse 2-3 advises, "Forgive your neighbor the wrong they have done, and then your sins will be pardoned when you pray." Does one person harbor anger against another and yet seek healing from the Lord? Both Sirach and Proverbs make it clear. Forgiveness and self-control aren't just virtues, they're essential to living a life of peace and wisdom. Our culture, however, often glorifies venting and retaliation. We're told to speak our minds, to stand up for ourselves, to clap back when we feel wronged. But Proverbs offers a countercultural path, one of patience, humility, and forgiveness. Proverbs 15 verse 18 says, "A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel." Think about how different our relationships, communities, and even our world could be if we lived this out. Imagine responding to anger not with retaliation, but with understanding. How many arguments could be avoided? How many relationships could be healed? Proverbs shows us that every time we choose self-control over anger, we invite God's peace into our lives and into the lives of those around us. Do you struggle with anger? Are there situations in your life where your temper often gets the best of you? Proverbs invites us to surrender this area of our hearts to God, to seek His wisdom and strength in learning to respond with patience and grace. Proverbs doesn't just address anger and emotions, it also highlights the vital role of discipline in shaping a wise and godly life. Discipline isn't punishment, nor is it simply about restriction. In Proverbs, discipline is presented as a tool for growth, a pathway to wisdom, and a sign of God's love for His children. Proverbs 12 verse 1 puts it bluntly, "Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid." That might sound harsh, but the message is clear. Rejecting discipline is like rejecting the opportunity to grow, improve, and align ourselves with God's purpose. Discipline creates boundaries that protect us, much like the walls of a city guard its people. Proverbs 25 verse 28 compares a lack of self-control to a city whose walls have been broken down, leaving it defenseless. Without discipline, we become vulnerable, not just to external temptations, but also to the destructive desires and impulses within us. Discipline, whether it's self-discipline or correction from others, is what helps us stay grounded and focused on the path God has laid out for us. Consider the example of the ant in Proverbs 6 verse 6-8. "Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest." The ant works steadily and diligently without needing to be told. It's self-motivated, disciplined, and focused on preparation for the future. Solomon uses this humble creature to remind us of the importance of being intentional and disciplined in our own lives, even when no one is watching. Discipline, as Proverbs teaches, isn't just about hard work. It's about humility. Proverbs 3 verse 11-12 says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent His rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those He loves, as a father the son He delights in." God's discipline, though it can feel uncomfortable, is a sign of His love and care for us. He corrects us not to harm us, but to protect and guide us, much like a loving parent steers their child away from danger. In our modern world, discipline is often misunderstood. We live in a culture that celebrates freedom from accountability and instant gratification. But Proverbs challenges this mindset, showing us that discipline is actually the path to true freedom. Proverbs 13 verse 18 warns, "Whoever disregards discipline comes to poverty and shame, but whoever heeds correction is honored." Discipline isn't about restriction, it's about setting ourselves up for lasting success, stability, and spiritual growth. The book of Sirach echoes Proverbs' wisdom on discipline. Sirach 18 verse 4-15 says, "God's mercy is shown to those who accept discipline and who are eager to obey His judgments." Discipline, whether it comes from God or from wise counsel, is a gift. It refines us, sharpens our character, and draws us closer to God's heart. Proverbs 10 verse 17 reminds us that when we embrace discipline, we're not just helping ourselves, we're influencing others. Whoever heeds discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray. Our willingness to accept correction sets an example for those around us. It shows humility, teachability, and a commitment to growth. Imagine the impact of a disciplined life. Think about a family, a workplace, or a community where people prioritize self-control, accountability, and responsibility. Proverbs teaches that discipline is the foundation for healthy relationships, productive work, and a life that honors God. Speaking of family, Proverbs has much to say about the role of family in shaping character and passing down wisdom. Family, according to Proverbs, is the first place where God's truth is taught and lived out. Proverbs 22 verse 6 famously declares, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." This isn't just a proverb, it's a principle that underscores the importance of parenting with intention. To train up a child means more than teaching them rules. It's about instilling in them a deep love for God, a respect for His Word, and an understanding of His wisdom. Children aren't just taught through words, they learn through example. Imagine Solomon passing down his own wisdom to his children, reflecting on the lessons he learned through both success and failure. He understood that the foundation laid in childhood would influence decisions for a lifetime. Proverbs 13 verse 24 reminds us of the importance of discipline in parenting. Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. This verse is often misunderstood. The rod here isn't about harsh punishment, it's about guidance and correction. Discipline, when done with love and patience, is a way of steering children away from harm and toward a life of wisdom. But Proverbs balances discipline with gentleness. Proverbs 15 verse 1 teaches, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Parenting is a calling to model both firmness and kindness. It's about creating a safe environment where children feel secure in both love and guidance. The book of Sirach speaks to this balance as well. Sirach 30 verse 1-2 says, "Whoever loves their child will discipline them diligently, so that they may rejoice in them later." Discipline isn't about control, it's about love. It's about shaping a child's heart, character, and future with patience and care. Proverbs also calls children to honor their parents. Proverbs 1 verse 8-9 says, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck." The wisdom and guidance of parents are portrayed as a crown, a blessing that adorns and strengthens the life of a child. But Proverbs places a great responsibility on parents as well. Proverbs 14 verse 26 says, "Whoever fears the Lord has a secure fortress, and for their children it will be a refuge." When parents walk in faith and integrity, they create a spiritual covering over their family. Their example becomes a source of strength and safety for their children. In today's fast-paced, distracted world, this wisdom feels more urgent than ever. Families are bombarded with conflicting values, and children are often exposed to messages that pull them away from God. Proverbs challenges us to make our homes a sanctuary of faith where God's truth is taught, cherished, and lived out. Are we creating an environment where God's wisdom is the foundation of our family life? Are we modeling patience, integrity, and love in a way that honors God and points our children toward Him? Proverbs reminds us that the legacy we leave isn't just about material wealth. It's about the character and faith we pass down. Proverbs 20 verse 7 says, "The righteous lead blameless lives. Blessed are their children after them." This verse speaks to the power of a godly example. When parents choose to walk in righteousness, their children reap the blessings of that legacy. It's a gift that shapes generations, creating a spiritual inheritance far more valuable than any earthly possession. Imagine what it would look like if every family embraced this wisdom. Homes would become places of love, truth, and spiritual growth. Communities would be transformed, and the ripple effects would reach far beyond. Proverbs teaches that the family isn't just a personal institution, it's a reflection of God's heart, a way to pass His truth from one generation to the next. Proverbs doesn't shy away from addressing some of the most personal and challenging areas of life, including the pursuit of purity and the dangers of temptation. These aren't abstract warnings. They're urgent, direct, and written with the understanding of how deeply these issues can impact the course of a life. Proverbs speaks boldly about the need to guard our hearts and to honor God with our thoughts, actions, and desires. Proverbs 5 verse 3-5 offers a vivid image of temptation, warning, "For the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave." Temptation often appears attractive, even sweet, but Proverbs pulls back the curtain to reveal the truth. It's a trap that leads to bitterness, destruction, and ultimately spiritual death. Solomon, as a man who faced the temptations of power, wealth, and desire, understood this deeply. He had everything at his fingertips, but he knew the cost of letting those temptations take root. In Proverbs, he uses striking imagery to warn us that giving in to temptation is not just a momentary mistake, it's a path that can spiral into ruin. Proverbs 6 verse 27-28 asks, "Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched?" The answer, of course, is no. These verses remind us that we can't flirt with sin without being harmed by it. Just as fire leaves burns, sin leaves scars on our hearts, our relationships, and our souls. But Proverbs doesn't just warn us about the dangers of temptation, it offers wisdom for resisting it. Proverbs 4 verse 23 teaches, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." This verse reminds us that the battle for purity starts long before our actions. It begins in the heart. What we allow into our minds and hearts, through our thoughts, desires, and even the influences we expose ourselves to, ultimately shapes our actions. The story of the young man in Proverbs 7 illustrates this vividly. Solomon describes how a young man, lacking judgment, is led astray by temptation. The seductress entices him with smooth words and false promises, and all at once he followed her, like an ox going to the slaughter. Proverbs 7 verse 22. It's a tragic image of someone who doesn't realize the cost of their choices until it's too late. The book of Sirach echoes this wisdom, cautioning us to avoid situations that could lead to temptation. Sirach 9 verse 4 warns, "Do not gaze at a virgin, lest you be ensnared by her beauty. Do not give your soul to prostitutes, lest you destroy your inheritance." Both Proverbs and Sirach emphasize that avoiding temptation isn't about fear, it's about wisdom. It's about setting boundaries, not out of restriction, but out of protection. In today's culture, these teachings on purity can feel countercultural. We live in a world that often glorifies indulgence, downplays boundaries, and mocks the concept of self-control. But Proverbs calls us to a higher standard. It reminds us that purity isn't just about avoiding sin, it's about honoring God with our whole being. Proverbs 16 verse 2 says, "All a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord." This verse reminds us that God doesn't just see our actions, He sees our intentions, our hidden thoughts, and the desires of our hearts. True purity isn't just about behavior. It's about aligning every part of ourselves with God's holiness. Imagine the freedom that comes from living a life of purity and integrity. It's not about living in fear of failure. It's about living in the peace and security of knowing that your life is fully aligned with God's truth. Proverbs 10 verse 9 promises, "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out." A life of purity and integrity brings confidence and peace. It's a life free from the weight of guilt or the fear of being exposed. But Proverbs also celebrates the beauty of godly love and intimacy within the boundaries of marriage. Proverbs 5 verse 18-19 says, "May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. A loving doe, a graceful deer, may her breast satisfy you always. May you ever be intoxicated with her love." This passage reminds us that God's design for intimacy is not restrictive. It's beautiful and fulfilling when experienced within the boundaries He has set. Rather than seeing purity as a burden, Proverbs encourages us to see it as a path to deeper joy and connection with God. It's a way to experience His blessings in our relationships, free from the destructive consequences of sin. Yet Proverbs doesn't shy away from confronting the reality of sin and its consequences. Proverbs 5 verse 22 to 23 warns, "The evil deeds of the wicked ensnare them. The cords of their sins hold them fast. For lack of discipline they will die, led astray by their own great folly." Sin isn't just a mistake. It's a trap that entangles us, binding us in ways we often don't recognize until it's too late. Society today often downplays the seriousness of sin, treating it as a trivial misstep or something that can be easily brushed off. But Proverbs reveals a deeper truth. Sin has lasting consequences. Proverbs 10 verse 16 says, "The wages of the righteous bring them life, but the income of the wicked brings them punishment." Every choice we make, whether in righteousness or sin, plants a seed that will eventually bear fruit, for better or for worse. One of the most sobering warnings in Proverbs comes from Proverbs 1 verse 29 to 31. "Since they hated knowledge and did not choose to fear the Lord, they will eat the fruit of their ways and be filled with the fruit of their schemes." This paints a powerful picture of sin's consequences. When we choose our own way over God's, we're planting seeds of regret, pain, and loss. The fruit of sin is bitter, and Proverbs urges us to turn away from it before it takes root. But even in its warnings about sin, Proverbs offers hope. Proverbs 28:13 says, "Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy." God doesn't leave us trapped in our mistakes. His mercy is always available for those who are willing to turn back to Him. Confession and repentance free us from the chains of sin, allowing us to walk in the light of His grace and forgiveness. Imagine the relief of laying down the weight of hidden sins and stepping into God's mercy. Proverbs teaches that no matter how far we've strayed, God's grace is greater. He is always ready to forgive, restore, and set us back on the path of righteousness. Are there areas in your life where sin has taken hold? Are there choices you've made that you're still carrying the weight of? Proverbs invites us to bring those burdens to God, to confess them, and to allow His mercy to wash over us. Sin has consequences, yes, but God's grace is stronger than any mistake. Proverbs 11 verse 19 assures us, "Truly the righteous attain life, but whoever pursues evil finds death." This isn't just about physical life and death. It's about the state of our souls, our hearts, and our relationship with God. Sin separates us from Him, but righteousness, living in alignment with His truth, brings life, peace, and restoration. God's sovereignty is one of the most profound truths in Proverbs. It reassures us that no matter how far we stray or how deeply we fail, nothing is beyond His control. Even the consequences of sin, though painful, are not outside of His plan. Proverbs 16 verse 4 reminds us, "The Lord works out everything to its proper end, even the wicked for a day of disaster." While this might sound unsettling, it reveals a crucial truth. God is a just God, and His justice ensures that sin is not meaningless. The pain sin brings is not without purpose. He uses it to correct us, to teach us, and to draw us closer to Him. Proverbs 3 verse 33 to 34 highlights the balance between God's justice and mercy. "The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but He blesses the home of the righteous. He mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed." While sin leads to consequences, humility and repentance invite God's favor and restoration. When we turn back to Him with a humble heart, His mercy is abundant, and His blessings flow freely. The imagery of God's sovereignty is perhaps best illustrated in Proverbs 21 verse 1. "In the Lord's hand, the king's heart is a stream of water that He channels toward all who please Him." Even the most powerful rulers, whose decisions might seem random or self-serving, are ultimately under God's control. If God can guide the hearts of kings, how much more can He guide the lives of those who trust in Him? This truth invites us to rest in God's authority. No sin, no mistake, and no failure can disrupt His plan. Proverbs 19 verse 21 captures this beautifully. "Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails." While we may stumble, God's purposes remain unshaken. His sovereignty ensures that even our missteps are woven into His larger tapestry, bringing about His ultimate glory and our ultimate good. This balance of justice and mercy is what makes Proverbs so powerful. It doesn't shy away from the reality of sin or the weight of its consequences, but it never leaves us without hope. Proverbs 28 verse 13 is a lifeline. Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy. God's mercy is always available. It's the open door waiting for anyone who's willing to step through it. Imagine the freedom that comes from confessing your sins to God. No more hiding, no more carrying the burden of guilt. Proverbs assures us that when we bring our failures into the light of God's grace, He not only forgives us but restores us. He takes our brokenness and turns it into something beautiful. God's discipline, while sometimes painful, is also an act of love. Proverbs 3 verse 11 to 12 reminds us, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent His rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those He loves as a father the son He delights in." Discipline isn't punishment. It's correction meant to protect us from greater harm and to shape us into who God created us to be. Even when we face the consequences of our sin, God's discipline is never about condemnation. It's about restoration. It's His way of steering us back onto the path of righteousness, reminding us of His love and His desire for us to live lives full of purpose and peace. The paradox of Proverbs is this: while sin leads to destruction, God's sovereignty transforms even our darkest moments into opportunities for redemption. Proverbs 16 verse 9 says, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." Even when we stray, God works behind the scenes, guiding us back to Him, shaping our hearts and teaching us to rely on His wisdom. The book of Job, another profound text in the wisdom literature, echoes this truth. Job's suffering was immense, yet through it all, he acknowledged God's sovereignty. In Job 42 verse 2 he declares, "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted." Like Proverbs, Job shows us that even when life feels chaotic or broken, God is still in control. He is sovereign over every detail, and nothing, no pain, no failure, no sin, is beyond His redemptive power. So, how do we respond to God's sovereignty? Proverbs calls us to trust Him fully, to live with humility, and to align our lives with His wisdom. Proverbs 14 verse 27 reminds us, "The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, turning a person from the snares of death." When we live in reverence of God, trusting His plans and following His ways, we step into the abundant life He promises. Are there areas in your life where you need to surrender to God's sovereignty? Are there mistakes or regrets that you're still carrying, unsure if God can redeem them? Proverbs invites us to bring these burdens to Him. His justice ensures that sin's consequences are not without purpose, but His mercy ensures that those consequences are not the end of the story. As we reflect on the journey through Proverbs, we're reminded of its central message. True wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. This reverence for God transforms every aspect of our lives, our words, our relationships, our work, our decisions, and even our failures. When we live in awe of God's holiness, trusting His guidance, and walking in His ways, we experience a life of peace, purpose, and joy. Proverbs challenges us to live differently. It calls us to humility in a world that glorifies pride, to integrity in a culture that rewards shortcuts, and to purity in an age that dismisses boundaries. It reminds us that every decision, every word, and every action reflects the state of our hearts. Are we living lives that honor God, or are we chasing paths that lead to destruction? As we close, remember the invitation that Proverbs extends, to pursue wisdom as a way of life. This isn't a one-time choice. It's a daily commitment to seek God's truth, to humble ourselves before Him, and to trust that His ways are always better than ours. Proverbs 3 verse 5 to 6 promises, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." This is the heart of Proverbs, a call to trust God completely, to let go of self-reliance, and to walk in His wisdom. If these teachings have spoken to you, take a moment to reflect. How might you realign your life with the wisdom of Proverbs? Are there areas where you need to embrace humility, seek forgiveness, or surrender control? And if you've been blessed by these insights, consider sharing them with others. Proverbs reminds us that wisdom is not just for ourselves, it's a light meant to be shared, a gift that has the power to transform lives. Here at Soul of the Scriptures, we're committed to uncovering the hidden treasures of Scripture, revealing the depth of God's love and His purpose for every one of us. If this journey through Proverbs has encouraged you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this message with someone who might need it. Remember, as Proverbs teaches us, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. May this wisdom guide you, guard you, and lead you into a life of peace, purpose, and unwavering trust in God. Stay blessed, and thank you for joining us on this journey.